I'm Micah Smith, and in this AA Illustrates, we're going to talk about integrating with Google BigQuery. Now, one of the coolest new features with the .21 release was the extended capabilities of the ODBC connections available within the database package. I know that's a mouthful, but what we're really saying is that the database package has been updated with this newest .21 release that's available right now in Community Edition. And with those updates, you can now connect to lots of different data systems that you previously couldn't connect to using ODBC. And so we're going to look at how we can connect to Google BigQuery and how we can use a bot to write to Google BigQuery, and also how we can read data from Google BigQuery that we might use from within our bot for the analysis of data, or for just writing that data exhaust from our bots out to a BigQuery environment. So let's take a look at how to set this up. First off, what are we going to cover in this session? We're going to talk about what is BigQuery. I know I kind of jumped right in talking about that. I'm excited about it. We're going to talk about exactly what that is and what benefits that could provide you as an organization. We'll then take a look at the BigQuery setup and sample data. So that's going to be pretty Google specific, but it's how to set up BigQuery, how to get all that set up so that you can actually access it, how to get that set up with your user account, and then also how to get some sample data into that data repository so that as we start to connect our bot to that BigQuery data repository, we can read data from it, but then we also have tables to write to so that we can practice writing to BigQuery as well. Sound good? Cool. So first off, what is Google BigQuery? Google BigQuery is a serverless, scalable, multi-cloud data warehouse designed for data analysis and insights. So we want to think about this as like a gigantic data repository. It's my ability to store tons and tons of data all in one place that I might use for further analysis in the future. And the nice thing about this is it allows me to use some of the Google AutoML capabilities or other ML capabilities for the analysis of my data. And so if I'm going straight from, let's say, some business process, I want to save the data for that business process out to a data repository that I'm going to be later using for analysis in support of a machine learning model. I can do all of that directly in BigQuery. Now, when I'm actually getting that data into BigQuery, I do have the ability to ingest that data by batch or by streaming data in real time. And so you can do either one of those. I think for streaming, you do have to have a paid environment. You can't just do it on the free one, but you can do it on batch in the free environment. And so you can commit your data to BigQuery, and then you can use it for analysis. The infrastructure is managed by Google. So the nice thing about this is you don't really have to worry about that part. And if any of you have talked to me in person and you know how I feel about that kind of stuff, I'm all about exporting that kind of risk to someone else who's an expert in that area, right? I'm not going to take on managing infrastructure for databases and for my entire RPA system if I can have that done by someone else who's an expert in that field, right? So it makes sense for me to stick to the RPA stuff. It makes sense for me to stick to the package development, that kind of stuff, and have someone else worry about the infrastructure. And that's why I really like Google BigQuery, because it's serverless and I don't have to worry about the infrastructure. That's Google's responsibility, and they're the experts of that. As far as fetching or inserting my data, I can do that directly through SQL queries and SQL commands. So if you're familiar with SQL, this will be very comfortable for you. You also have the ability to do it through the BigQuery API. And there are pre-built client libraries for C#, Python, Java, Node, Go, lots of other popular languages. And so if you want to interface with your BigQuery environment, you do have the ability to do so through that API, or you can do it through SQL and through ODBC like we're going to be doing in this demo and tutorial. Finally, you can then integrate the data from your BigQuery environment into business intelligence tools. So you can use the likes of Google Data Studio, Tableau, Power BI, lots of different tools that you can then connect to so that you can have better visualization access to your data. And so really it's about how do I store massive amounts of data, how do I analyze that data, and how do I make the best use of it? And it may be that, hey, I'm not actually going to use this data right now, or I don't have a specific use for it right now, but I want to store it someplace, because when we think about bots and as they run, they're creating what I would call data exhaust, right? There's something that's created, there's some data that they're dealing with, whether that's dealing with a business process, mapping data from one application to another. There's some data that's moving around. And I have the ability to store that. In the case of BigQuery, I can store all of it if I want to. And then I can later go through and analyze it to see what kind of valuable insights I can discover about how maybe I can even automate my bots even further. Or maybe I can automate my bot completely and I don't have to have that bot, or it's a more mature bot in the future because I've been able to analyze that data. I can do some predictive analysis. Maybe I'm going to build a machine learning model that my bot's going to leverage in the future so that it doesn't have to do so much decision making on its own. Cool. So let's jump into the BigQuery setup and our sample data. Now there's really two halves to this, right? The first is on the BigQuery side. And on the BigQuery side, we need to select a project that we're going to use. And if you haven't signed up for any of the Google Cloud stuff, you will have to have a project that's been set up. I have a project set up, but I don't have BigQuery set up right now. So I'm going to go through the process of showing you how to enable the BigQuery API. And then, oops, sorry, wrong click. And then we're also going to go through and we'll create a data set, we'll create a table, and then we will load some BigQuery sample data. And I'll show you where you can get both of those. After we've done that, we need to do some work on our local workstation side. And this is on our bot runner itself, or in my case, the bot developer machine. I'm going to be using Community Edition for this entire episode, so you'll be able to follow along with me. We'll need to install the Simba ODBC driver, and this is directly from Google. This is the ODBC driver that they suggest using. There's a 32-bit and a 64-bit version. I'm just going to install the 32-bit. And then we can also set up BigQuery ODBC connection. So I'll walk you through that process of exactly how do we set up that ODBC connection so we have a user DSN that we can then reference from our bot. Okay, I know that sounds like a lot of setup. It sounds like a lot of foreign stuff. I promise you this is a fun demo. Let's go through it together and we'll start setting this stuff up. So the first thing we want to do is select our project and enable BigQuery API. So I'm going to click on this link. I've got this in a link here. What I'm going to do is for the video, I'll put this in the description, or on Dev Portal, it'll be in the text below, so that you have the ability to go through and do the same stuff. You'll have all these same links. So this is coming directly from the Quick Start from Google Cloud Console. If you want to follow along with all of this, you can. I've already got my project selected because I only have one, so there's really not a lot for me to do there. I can click on this Go to Project Selector, and you'll see for me, I only have a single project, so that's not really like the most exciting thing here. If I had multiple projects, that would allow me to kind of switch those around, but because I only have one, there's really not a lot going on in this particular screen. So at this point, I've selected my project. Now, I'm going to come back here to my Quick Start, and I'm going to click to enable the API. And again, this isn't really going to be a whole lot to see. It's just going to say like, hey, this API has been enabled. Cool. So it says, what project do you want to register this for? I'm going to select my only project that I have and hit continue. And we're done. So the BigQuery API has been enabled. Now, notice that it says to use the API, you need the right credentials. So I'm going to hit go to credentials. And it's trying to coach me through this process, right? I do need some credentials because what we're going to do is when we set up our ODBC connection locally, I'm going to have to use something from my credentials to point to my Google BigQuery environment. So BigQuery API is the API that I'm using. I can select either user data or application data. We're going to select user data because we want to use OAuth here. So I'm going to hit that and hit next. Now I can add or remove scopes if you're advanced with your Google Cloud setup and you actually have scopes defined and you've got some roles set up, you can do that. I'm just going to hit save and continue here. I'm not going to mess with this for right now. And then it asks for my application type. And for my application type here, I'm going to select web application. And it's going to show me some of these client IDs. I can use one of these if I want, or I can create a new one. And so what I'm going to do is hit continue, which will allow me to create a new one. And so I'm going to here say the name. I'm going to call this one AA Illustrates BigQuery. Okay. If I was doing this in JavaScript, or if I was doing this with some kind of redirect, I could provide that here. We're not. We just want to authenticate this once. So I'm going to hit create. Cool. And it has given me the details that I have here. I can hit download to save my client ID. Otherwise, I can just hit done. And what I'm going to do is click on my AA Illustrates BigQuery account here. And there's really nothing else that we have to have from this. I just wanted to show you that our account has been created. So let's flip back over to our slides now. And we're going to do the second part of this, which is to load BigQuery sample data. So we've enabled the BigQuery API. Now we want to put some data into our BigQuery environment, and we're going to create that data set so that we have something to query from when we actually include this in a bot. So on this load BigQuery sample data, which is my second link, I'm going to click on that one. And this is a website called E for Excel. I don't know anything about this one. I do see that it was one of the sites that came up when I was searching for large Excel files. And so he does have a disclaimer here that this is free to use, so we're not breaking anyone's rules here or anything like that. I'm not taking advantage of anyone. I'm going to download this 50,000 sales records Excel right here. I think it's actually a CSV. We'll see in a second. So I downloaded that. I'm going to show in folder, and I'll open that up real quick. Yeah, it's a CSV. So inside of that, I've got this 50,000 sales records CSV. Notice that it's like 6 meg. If I extract that out, we can use that here in a second. Let's see, extract all. Cool. And so we can use this to load into our Google BigQuery. So I'm going to close this. I don't need that guy's website anymore. Back on my Google Cloud platform, I'm going to go to Home. And you can see that I have actually pinned BigQuery at the top here. If you did not do that like me, which you probably haven't, you should be able to find BigQuery down here. It's in the Big Data section, and there you can see BigQuery. So you can click on that here, and that will take you to your BigQuery environment. And this is where you can start to see anything that's tied to your project. I don't think I have anything in here. Yeah, my project's empty right now, so I don't have any data sets. So the first thing I want to do to get a data set created is I'm going to click on this kebab menu right here, and I'm going to say create data set. And let's call this one AA Illustrates data set. And I'm going to copy that. And I'm going to put it in my notepad document for right now, just because we're going to need this here in a little bit. So I want to make sure I have it and have it exactly like it is typed here. So I'll hit create data set. Okay, so my data set is created, but right now my data set is empty. So what we're going to do is I'm going to click on the kebab menu for my data set and hit open. And here I have the ability to actually create my first table for my data set. So I'm going to hit create table. And I can create an empty table, or I can actually create a table and upload some documents, or upload a document to basically fill that table directly. And that's what we're going to do. So if I hit this upload, I can select the file that I want to use, and I'm going to browse out to our downloads directory, and I can grab that 5,000 sales record, or 50,000, sorry, sales record CSV. Notice it automatically recognized the CSV format, so that's great. My data set name here is AA Illustrates. If I had a new data set or multiple data sets, I could kind of swap between those, but I only have one, so I'm good. Same with my project, I only have one, so that's what I'm using. And then I have to give my table a name. So what we've downloaded is actually a bunch of sales records. We're not really going to do anything with the sales records, but let's just call this sales records, gotta spell it right, as our table name. And then in the schema section, when you define a database schema, you're basically saying, like, what is the data that is in this particular field or in this particular column? And it might be a date, it might be an integer, it might be a string. What I'm going to do is select this button that says schema and input parameters can be auto-detected. And what that means is that Google BigQuery, upon import, is going to try to automatically detect what each of those fields are, and so it can define what that column of data should look like and ultimately define my schema. We don't need to mess with anything else here, so I'm going to hit create table. And it will import that file and create the table for me. Now, depending on your internet, that might take a couple minutes or no time at all. So you can pause this part if you need to. At this point, my sales records table has been created. So if I click on that, I can see the schema, right? So it created a bunch of strings. It did order date as date. It did my order ID as an integer, my units sold as an integer, prices float, right? So I can see the different data types that have been defined for each of these. If I go to detail, it just tells me the number of rows, how big the table is, stuff like that. And then if I go to preview, I can see the data itself, and I can start to actually go through this if I wanted to. But again, with 50,000 records, I'm not going to just like leaf through all of this. So what you would most likely do is you would start to write some queries, right? And I could write a query that, you know, it gives you a kind of a dummy one here, sorry. Let's say select star from, and then this is my project, my data set, and my table. Limit, let's say limit 10. We don't need to see 1,000. And hit run. And I'll actually close these others. It does this weird thing where like, I've got a side-by-side view, and I don't know why. Google BigQuery was doing that for me before too. All right, so now I can just see the top 10 records or whatever it might be. All right, so if we go back to our slides now, we're done with the Google BigQuery stuff, right? We've got data in there. We've got a project set up. We have an account set up. So now we need to work on the local workstation side. The first step on the local workstation side is to install Simba ODBC driver. So I'm going to click on this. And again, this link is going to be in the description. It's also going to be in the text for Dev Portal. But this is my ODBC driver. And this is a collaboration between Google and Magnitude Simba to provide these ODBC drivers. And so what I can do is I'm going to grab the 32-bit version. It's going to download that for me. Show in folder. I can install that, right? Now you can see it's got a 1 on it. I've actually already installed it, so I'm not going to redo that again. But it's basically just a next type of deal. You don't have to fill anything out. It's just going to take you through the process of installing that ODBC driver, and you'll go through that. Now, I'm only installing the 32-bit version. If you want to install the 64-bit version, you can. I'm doing the 32-bit because that's what I was testing with. I know that that works. You're on your own if you want to do the 64-bit, but I'd installed both before and they didn't seem to have a conflict. So I assume that what's happening is we're using the 32-bit. All right, so from there, what I want to do is actually, let me go back to my slide here. I think the next thing we want to do is actually, we're going to set up our BigQuery ODBC connection. So let me minimize that. And if I go to start, I'm just going to type in ODBC. And notice the data sources 32-bit shows up. I'm going to open that up. And I have the ability to create a user DSN. And that is my data source name. So what I'm going to do is hit add here. And that's going to allow me to add a new data source. And when I do that, it's saying, hey, what driver do you want to use to power this particular data source? For us, we want to select this one that says Simba ODBC driver for Google BigQuery. And that's the one that we just walked through. Like, this is where you grab the MSI. This is the installer for it. So I'm going to hit finish here. And now I have to fill out the details specific to this instance of my ODBC connection to my BigQuery environment, right? And I say it that way because if you have multiple projects, you could have multiple data sources pointing to those multiple projects. But for our purposes, I'm going to give it a name. Let's call it AA illustrates Google BigQuery. This is way too long of a name, but we're going to go for it. So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to paste that over into my Notepad document so I can keep track of this stuff. We will need this one later, so copy that out. For the description, I'm just going to say Simba ODBC connection to Google BigQuery. Cool. Now onto our authentication. We can either do service authentication or user authentication. We had set our BigQuery API up with the credentials for a user authentication. So I'm going to click user authentication here, and I'm going to click the sign in. And when I go to sign in, it's going to ask me what account I want to use, and it's going to ask me if Google BigQuery is able to access my account. Now, I had multiple accounts there, so that's why you may have seen that first window pop up that says, what Google account do you want to use? I've just signed in with a bunch of them. But I've selected here the same account that I used when I set up my project and when I set up BigQuery. So make sure that you're consistent on that, because you can get screwed up as Google has multiple accounts or as you have multiple accounts. Make sure that you're enabling this on the exact same account. So I'm going to hit allow here. Now, when I hit allow, it's going to give me this code, and I need to copy this code, and I'll put this in my little notepad document over here. I really don't need it beyond that. I'm just going to copy it for right now because we just need it for our ODBC connection here. So I'm going to switch back to my ODBC, and it's asking for my confirmation code. Now that confirmation code is the exact same code that we just copied to our clipboard. So I'm going to paste that in here. Okay. Now with that done, I have to click on this refresh token field. And when I do that, it actually pulls down a token that will be used for this ODBC connection. This is, again, a one-time setup thing. I don't have to do this every single time I want to run my bot or anything like that. I probably would have to do it again if I change my password for my Google account, but as long as I'm not doing that, I should be good here. So I've got my refresh token in there. The only other thing I have to do here is select my project. And again, I only have one project, so I'm going to select that one, right? Now, at this point, I could select a default data set if I wanted to. Notice we had our AA Illustrates default data set. You can do that if you want. I'm going to leave it blank, but I am going to click this button that says test. Okay? And at this point, it's going to try and connect to my Google BigQuery environment. It's going to try and make sure that it's able to establish that connection. That's just my first way of being able to say, hey, I'm good. It looks like this is probably going to work. So I'll hit OK here, and then I'll hit OK. Now, we're going to need the name, just like I said, of this DSN, right? Because we're going to use that when we actually set up our database commands within our bot. So hopefully you've been able to hang with me so far. What we're going to do from here is now we're going to move into the bot building segment of our AA Illustrates. And we're going to actually build a bot that's going to allow us to write to that BigQuery environment. We're also going to have that same bot read from the BigQuery environment. So we're going to update the BigQuery environment, and then we're going to read from it to make sure that we're getting the data that we wanted out. So let me hit OK here. Yeah, I'll hit OK. That's fine. I don't need to leave that up. And let me go back to my control room here. All right. So I'm, again, using Community Edition. This is on the .21 release. So if you haven't used this yet on .21, it does look a little bit different. The navigation changed a bit, but hang with me here and I'll show you what we're doing. So I'm going to click on the Automation tab here. And again, depending on how your view is, you might have this pinned to the left side here and you just see the icons. As you mouse over them, you see the same thing, so it's fine. On my Automation tab, I'm going to click on this Create Subfolder button. And I'm going to create a folder just called AA Illustrates. As you can see from my illustrious folder creation, I'm trying to be better about organizing my bots in a meaningful way. So if you actually did a search, you'd probably see there's a bunch of bots that are just called sample, which are a terrible idea. I never know what those are. Okay, so we're going to create our AA Illustrates folder, and inside of that, let's call this one BigQuery Demo. And we'll hit Create and Edit. Cool. So now we have an empty bot, and this is our bot building interface. And really, we're just focusing on the database package for this one, and really only a couple actions within that. So the first is for our connection. And we're going to establish a database connection to our Google BigQuery environment. So if I go here for my connection mode, I'm going to select default. And here I can give my own connection string. And actually the connection string for this one is just going to be DSN and that stands for data source name. And again, this is what we saw on that ODBC screen. Let's go back that one time so we see what we're talking about here. This is my data source name, which is that AA illustrates Google BigQuery. So I'm going to paste that in here. Let's make sure that I've got that. There we go. Cool. So that's going to allow me to establish that connection to my Google BigQuery environment. So we've got our DSN set up. Now we want to actually go back to our, let's do a read first, just to make sure we're able to, well, no, let's do an insert. So let's go to the insert, update, and delete. I'm going to drag that over here. So for our statement, we're going to have to write our own insert statement so that we can commit some data to the BigQuery environment and to specifically our sales records table. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a notepad document so that we can kind of write this insert statement out together. And then I will copy this and I'll save it so that you can have it in the description and in the what we have in the dev portal content as well. So you'll just be able to copy this out and you don't have to write the whole thing, but I want to explain it as we go through it. So first off, we're going to say insert into, and that's just typical SQL syntax for us being able to write an insert statement. From there, we want to actually say where we want to write this stuff. So I'm going to say GCP-enterprise-PM. So that is my project name, followed by my dataset name, which is AA illustrates dataset. Hopefully I typed that right. I made a big deal about copying this over to the other notepad and then I didn't copy it. And then finally my table, which is going to be sales records, and that's it. So I'm saying insert into, and then I've got my project name, my dataset name, and then my table name. And then because I have values already pre-created for everything or every single column within our data set, I'm going to copy those out real quick. So let me copy this over here and we'll walk through that. So, and if we go, let's go back. Okay, so here, region would be North America. I'll make it a little bit smaller. There we go. Countries, United States of America. Serial is our item type, and obviously you can read all of those. So what I want to do though is this data set, I think, ends its order data in like 2017. So the data that I've changed is specific to the date for the order and the date for the order fulfillment. So we've got 6/15 of 2021 and 6/20 of 2021 for our order fulfillment. And I've also created a order ID that starts with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I did that because I want to make sure that we're able to actually find our data once we're trying to retrieve this to validate our insert. So I'm going to hit copy here. I will paste that back into our statement, and then we can hit run. And at this point, what we should be seeing is that the bot agent will take over. It will run. It will establish that connection through our ODBC connection to our BigQuery data environment, and then commit that data for us. Now, it just says your bot has run successfully. Obviously, we didn't get anything back in this case, and we just kind of sent the data. So what we could do is go back out here to BigQuery and run this. But what I'd like to do instead is let's go back and do a read from. So within our bot, what we want to do is we want to actually read this data from BigQuery, and that will be our method of validating that it got bat success, or that we actually wrote successfully to BigQuery. So I'm going to disable our insert statement because we don't need that. And technically we should have a disconnect here as well. I didn't do that before, but that would be a good practice just to make sure that we're disconnecting any database connections that we establish. But back to my read from. So here I'm going to enter a select statement. And I guess we can practice the select statement here just to make sure that it works. Let's go to, so limit 10, I'm going to leave that. Let's say order by, and then I guess if we do order, what was that other date? Oh, ship date. Ship date descending. Let's see if this works. So we'll hit run here. And we should see one that's obviously ours, right? Here's our North American cereal, my homage to cereal because I love it. So we can see our order ID is the 12345 that we talked about. Here's my order date and my ship date. So this is the one particular row that we're really concerned with. So let's copy this select statement. I'm going to put that back into my bot, and that will be my select statement. It says maximum number of records to fetch. I have it within my query already. I guess I could just get rid of that limit 10, and I'll just put the 10 down here. And then I can set a timeout. But most importantly, I want to export this data to a CSV, right? Because as of right now, it wouldn't have been saved anywhere. So I'm going to browse out to my desktop, and I will just create like a dummy CSV file someplace. So let's go to ctemp, and I will create a new text document. Let's turn off this filter so we can find my new text document. Okay, so there's my new text document, and I'm just going to rename this to AA illustrates BigQuery.csv. Cool. And that's the file we want to use, so I'll hit open there. And overwrite, that's fine. Do we want to export with header? Let's say yes. Just in case we ever want to read it back, we would know where that came from. So at this point, let's hit run. And at this point, it's kind of the opposite of what we looked at before, right? Before we were writing out to BigQuery. This time we're going to be reading from BigQuery and storing that out to a CSV. Obviously, if this is part of a much larger bot, where I'd go from here is to read that data from the CSV file and then do something with it, right? Whether that's take some action or commit that data to some other system or make use of that data from within my bot's actions. Those are all possibilities. Okay, so my bot is now executing. It's going to be reading from that BigQuery environment. Again, we got just like a success message. I guess we could have done some message boxes or something like that. Let's go out to our ctemp directory, since that's where we are saving that file. And we called it A illustrates something, I think. A illustrates BigQuery CSV. Open that guy up. Cool. And we said we want to see the top 10 rows, so we see that. Let's spread out our order IDs a little bit more. There we go. This was the record that we had written to BigQuery, which was our United States of America serial order. So we're able to read successfully from BigQuery. We're able to commit data to BigQuery. Now, why does that matter, right? Well, the way that I think of using this is I'm already doing a bunch of stuff within my bots. I want to make sure I'm storing that data someplace. And so BigQuery is yet another option for you to successfully store and then further analyze the data that your bots are dealing with, right? And so whether that's transactional data, whether that's data from bots that are scheduled, data from bots that have been run through ARI or ad hoc, I want to have a collection of that data someplace. I want to be able to analyze that further. I might even have like one table that's set up for my bot analytic data and another table that's set up for just like that, like data exhaust of my bots, right? The stuff that my bots are dealing with. I'm going to write out every variable. I'm going to write out whatever I want, but I'm going to set a standard for the way that I'm doing that as an organization so that I have this huge data store that I can then start to evaluate and determine where I can make further improvements within my process. So let's jump back to the slides. This was our hands-on slide that we didn't see, but there it is. And then a recap. So integrating Google with BigQuery. As a recap, 1, BigQuery is a serverless data warehouse for storing and analyzing volumes of data. And again, we saw that. The serverless aspect of it is really interesting, I think. And again, anytime that I can offset the risk of me managing an environment or me managing a system and put that to someone else who's an expert in that field or that area, I'm all about that. And so this is another example of that. And I say that as a person who has run enterprise platforms before and been the guy responsible for doing the local installs, doing the architecture, and having to worry about like what happens as a part of disaster recovery and what happens when we have high availability and what happens in those failover situations where, hey, my failover works, but these other dependent applications are not up, and so I can't test, right? So it's the pain of knowing those experiences and being able to offset that risk to someone else. Number 2, setting up our ODBC connection is a one-time thing. So we did that once, and that will enable us to connect to our BigQuery dataset. And again, we can then connect to different tables if we need to with that one connection, or we could establish multiple connections to deal with multiple projects if we really had that many. Most organizations are probably only going to have 1 or 2 projects, or maybe a project per environment, and then they would have specific data sets for bots or tables for bots, but you could kind of change all of those around just by your the way that you're doing your SQL statements. It wouldn't be something you have to do in ODBC every time. And then finally, the updated ODBC connection capabilities of the Automation 360.21 release make this connection possible. So if you wanted to connect to different ODBC sources, if you want to connect to BigQuery, if you want to connect to Snowflake, those are all capable now with the ODBC connection strings that you can use within the database connection, or the database connect action, I should say, within the .21 release. Cool. So thanks so much for hanging out with me on this one. I know this is kind of a different tutorial because we spent a lot of time setting up the Google stuff, but I wanted to show how that integration can really work with those other platforms. And again, this is just scratching the surface, right? There's tons of different applications, tons of different platforms that your RPA environment can connect to. And I wanted to show this in an example that someone else could, kind of follow along with, play along with, and set the same thing up. But Google BigQuery is really fun to use. It's easy to set up. It's easy to get going. You don't have to be a database expert. You just have to be able to set up that project and then set up your API connection, and then your ODBC connection. You're good to go. So again, my name is Micah Smith. Thanks so much for hanging out. For more tutorials like this, make sure to follow us on YouTube. Make sure to connect with us on LinkedIn, and make sure to check out the developer portal. Go be great. I'll see you in the next one.